Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Very special guest today, Dr. Paul Kengor. He's a professor at Grove City College in Western Pennsylvania, and he's the author of numerous books, including books on Ronald Reagan, Karl Marx, and most recently, he has written a book about the Stigmata, the history of the stigmatists, the things revealed to them, and so forth. Very mysterious subject that deserves some more exposure. Dr. Kengor, thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, Kennedy, it's really cool to meet you. You and I both write for Crisis Magazine. I've read you there for years, and good to be in touch. Thanks for having me on.
Well, thank you. I'm always humbled when a real smart person thinks that my work is good. So I'm happy about that. So we were talking before we came on. I know this has nothing to do with Stigmata, but you're a Steelers fan. I'm a Bills fan. Who do you think is going to have who's besides the Chief? Who's going to have the highest seed in the AFC? Do you think?
Yeah. I'm so glad you started with football. And I was just joking for the audience to know. I was typing an email to my kids this morning about an article on the Immaculate Conception, and I started typing Immaculate Reception.
Yep.
So if people don't know what that is, Google that. December 23rd, 1972. Right? I think was that it? I believe it was. Another great day in the history of humanity. Um, but yeah, the Bills. I'm a Bills fan. I like the Bills a lot. I think Josh Allen's amazing.
He's
Frankly.
Superman. Yeah.
He really is, and they should have won a Super Bowl by now. By the way, isn't that the story of the Bills always?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
In fact, where I am in Western Pennsylvania, so I grew up in Butler, Pennsylvania,
Yep.
which is
Okay.
now,
Yeah.
yeah, I know, infamous, although
Yep.
not infamous because Trump survived the shooting. But Jim Brady is from, who was the Bills quarterback that lost all those Super Bowls in the late '80s, early 1990s when they should have won a whole bunch of them. Was it late '80s?
Oh, Jim
Anyway,
Kelly, you mean? Jim Kelly?
yeah, Jim Kelly.
Yeah.
Jim Kelly. Yeah, and he was from where I was growing up. So I was a fan back then. And I mean, Steelers are always my number one team, but like the Bills, like the Green Bay Packers, and this year, I mean, I'd put my money on the Bills. I would say
Yeah.
probably like Detroit Lions
Yeah.
versus Bills, but then again, the Chiefs and Mahomes and Patrick Mahomes find a way to win,
They do.
which is what great teams do.
They have some
Even when
like
the other team's better.
they have some like weird mojo going on. Some,
Mhm.
they did
Right,
a
right.
seance or something because they just have all this weird stuff making those balls go through the uprights and it doesn't make any sense.
Maybe,
It's
maybe Taylor Swift was leading the seance. I
oh
don't know.
goodness. Well, Tom Brady, his ex-wife was she was into witchcraft and stuff, and
That was crazy.
I know.
I was really sad to see that. I was always a Brady fan.
Yeah.
And when I first heard that, I thought it was a lot of people just dumping on Brady, kind of envious of Brady. But no, a lot of that checked out.
Hmm.
It's really, was it Giselle Bundchen or
Giselle
something
Bundchen
like
or
that?
something. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really, really sad to see. And not long after that, the marriage fell apart.
Hmm.
Everything completely fell apart. It's really, Tom Brady was the original Captain America, I think,
Yeah.
right? About 10, 15 years ago. It's
Yeah.
sad to see what's happened with him. And by the way, they had a Catholic wedding. I mean,
Yep.
he's
He's a baptized.
Catholic.
He wanted to go to He wanted to go to Notre Dame, but he went to Michigan instead.
Yeah, wow, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's yeah, and I think he was like a seventh round draft pick or
He
something like
was.
that.
Hmm.
He was, and he turns out to be the winningest quarterback of all time. So you just never know how this stuff is gonna turn out.
And now Bill Belichick. And now we've, for all the viewers who don't like football, just give us a minute or two more because this is important. Bill Belichick's going to North Carolina to be the head coach of the college team there.
Well, he'll turn it around too,
Yep.
and UNC is a ACC team. Now they're
Hmm.
always good at basketball, probably arguably the greatest NCAA basketball team ever, along with maybe UCLA.
And
But
Duke.
UNC had, yeah, Duke, right? UNC had an even longer run with Dean Smith. But he'll turn it around. ACC is my conference because I went to Pitt, University of Pittsburgh, and I was there in the late 1980s. We were amazing, late 70s, 80s. Actually, this year we started 7-0, and we just dropped five in a row. It's insane, 7-5. But he will make. That's a good conference. I mean,
Yep.
Florida, Miami's in there. Florida State, SMU had a good year. I don't know what
Yep.
they're doing in the
Clemson.
ACC.
Clemson.
Clemson, that's right. And so he will suddenly make that a really good team
Yep.
because any young guy is going to want to go play for Bill Belichick, and also any of those guys' dads
That's the
they're
thing.
going to say, "Hey, you should go play for Bill Belichick."
Yep.
He'll do like Deion Sanders did, but even better. He'll have
That's
that
right.
team winning in a couple years at the
Yep.
most, especially
Well,
with the transfer portal.
with
Let's
yeah,
just
with the
talk about
NIL.
football, right?
I mean, you know what's funny? I've actually been I like to listen to a couple of football podcasts, and they're great. I mean, there usually isn't politics and stuff, but I thought, man, it'd be so great if there was just like a you know, some sort of sports podcast where it doesn't have to be about Catholicism, but it's just the sensibilities are there. So
Right,
just the
right.
little things don't sneak in. It'd be nice if something like that. So maybe that's another venture for
Hey,
another
maybe
day.
me, you, and Harrison Butker could launch that.
Yeah, maybe.
He's
Exactly.
in there
Exactly.
anyway. Right, right.
Crazier things have happened. Um, all right. So let's get into the topic here. Okay. So
All right.
stigmata. Now, this is one of those, I mean, everyone kind of knows what the stigmata is. It's the subject of horror movies and all this kind of stuff. It's in the, it gets co-opted by the, macabre side of entertainment and stuff, but it's a real phenomenon. So why don't you just give us a quick background of like what it is, and then we can go from there.
Yeah, it's really a shame the way it's been demeaned and attacked and really demonized, right? Quite literally. Of course, by Hollywood. What else would you expect? But in real life, people that get stigmata are people that are eminently holy, people that are, often on their road to sainthood, or at least the process, blessed servant of God. They're remarkably holy men and women. In the case of history, there have been, we think, about 400 to 500 historically. Now, everybody thinks that the first was St. Francis, who received them September 17th, 1224, so about 800 years ago. But it's quite possible that the Apostle Paul was the first.
Oh yeah,
In
okay.
fact, yeah, in fact, you can read in Galatians, and Paul says in Galatians, "I bear in my body the markings of Jesus Christ," which translated into Greek is stigmata. And some people think that when he's talking about that, he's talking metaphorically, kind of in the same way of being shipwrecked, being tortured, being cast to sea, being flogged this many times, X many times, and so forth. But it's quite possible that he meant the literal markings of Christ in his hands and in his feet, like stigmata. And I go through that in the book. By the way, very interestingly, so two of the greatest mystics in the history of the church who claim to be able to have visions of the past, visionaries, and Catherine Emmerich,
Mm-hmm.
who was the inspiration in many cases for Mel Gibson, the very scenes in Mel Gibson's The
Yep.
Passion. St. Therese Newman, who died in the 1960s. Now, Aunt Catherine Emmerich was 1774 to 1824. They claim to be able to see things in the life of Jesus, in the life of the Blessed Mother, the life of the apostles. And they both actually said separately to their spiritual directors, they said, I have seen Paul. I see him walking. I could picture him describing everything. And he has the stigmata. He has the markings of Christ in his hands. And the spiritual directors are like, really? Yes, he has them. So they claim that the first was actually Paul. So I don't know that they weren't doing any theological deep dive with the New Testament or anything like that. It's just what they saw in their visions. But other than Paul, you got to fast forward there to the year 12 centuries later, 11, 12 centuries later with Francis. Then after that, probably, well, there's quite a number after that, but the most probably the most famous stigmatist other than those two, than Francis, would be Padre Pio.
Mm-hmm.
And he had him for 50 years, September 1918 until right up before his death, 1968. But that said, Kennedy, it's kind of interesting. The vast majority of stigmatists have actually been women.
Mm-hmm.
So over 90% have been women. And if you're looking for a geographic area, the vast majority, or 70%, have been Italian.
Yeah.
And I think that shouldn't surprise people, though, because I bet I bet 70% of saints are Italian. I'd have to look that up,
It's a
right?
big
But
percentage.
it's a big percentage. And then the second largest number after Italy is France. You'd probably guess that, right? And then like Germany after that. So it
Irish.
follows that. Yeah. Well, and yeah. So and then over time, I mean, it has now become in more recent times as there have been more stigmatists in the 20th century and so forth. It is now more geographically diverse.
Mm-hmm.
Hilaire Belloc said the faith is Europe and Europe is the faith. Well, the faith has been dying in Europe and it's been spreading out into Asia, into Africa, into Latin America, into North America. And so we're now seeing more stigmatists from other non-European countries. But overall, those are some numbers: who was first and who was second, etc.
So that's interesting, the timeline, because, okay, it's likely Paul, but then kind of the first documented case since apostolic times would be St. Francis, as far as we can tell. Um, is it kind of like, like the charismatic graces, where there's a time where there's a lot of it going on in the early church, and then is it kind of like that, where something's going on where God says people need to see this and there's a particular purpose? Does it kind of seem like that?
I think so, at least in terms of where we are now. In fact, I think kind of akin to Marian apparitions, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there have been more Marian apparitions recently in recent times, historically, last 500 years. I mean, we're
Yeah.
talking about this around the time of Our Lady of Guadalupe, right? In 1531, I think that was. And so there have been a lot more after that in the last 400 or 500 years. And the same has been true with stigmatists. So it looks like after Paul, we don't know of any until you get to Francis in the year 1224. Francis died in the year 1226. Now, some people might say, well, there are probably some during that period. We just don't know about it. I don't think so, because when this happens,
Yeah.
everybody knows about it. I
Yeah.
mean, I got a chapter in this little Italian nun from Calabria named Blessed Elena Aiello,
Yep.
and when her hands and feet would start to bleed like clockwork on a Thursday, Friday, Good Friday, 3 o'clock, and then things just disappear on Saturday. All right, this was the case with many of them. Pio bled continuously for 50 years, every day, a literal cup a day, as measured by his doctors. All right, but when some little nun known for her holiness starts bleeding like that, like clockwork, everybody comes on foot, on horse, in carriage. They all want to see. It's a spectacle. And by the way, they don't act like spectacles themselves. They're not out there in the public square saying, look at me, look at me. They're in bed. They're in pain. They're on the rack. It's like they're on the cross.
Yeah.
They can't get up and walk around and show people their hands. I mean, they're in pain. Some have called them living crucifixes.
Yeah.
So in my point, in it makes sense that there wouldn't be any until Francis. We didn't know about it at that time. I think maybe a good question is, I can only speculate, why is this happening more commonly now, 1700s, 1800s, 1900s, and even some reported cases to this day? We're way beyond that initial apostolic age, and
Yeah.
maybe this is a time when, in our skeptical age, people need to, like Thomas, say, Lord, I need to see the wounds. I need to stick my fingers in the holes in his hands. So we need to see things now, because we're so far away from the time that Christ physically walked the earth in the first century.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I was just in Assisi in November. Actually, I was on a
Oh, I
pilgrimage,
love it.
and
I've been there one time. It's amazing.
yeah, it's my viewers. A lot of them know this, but my name is Anglo. But I grew up in an Italian family on my mother's side,
Me
and
too.
oh,
Yeah,
did you? Very
yeah,
good.
yeah, yeah. You,
And
you know, we've got to start a list of guys like this. All right. Michael Knowles. I've
yeah,
talked to Michael Knowles about
yeah,
this. Who else? David Henry, who plays the young Reagan in the Reagan movie. The Reagan movie
okay,
is based on one of my books on Ronald Reagan. But these are guys who end up with non-Italian last names because the dad isn't Italian. But yeah, my Ancestry.com DNA test, I'm like 55 to 65% Calabrian. I mean, you would
okay.
never know that. But there's a whole bunch of us that are like that. That we'd be Italian. Everyone would think of us as Italians if our dad gave us the Italian name, but that's not the way it
Well,
turns out.
my mom came over in '67.
Wow,
When she was
wow,
10 or 11. They're from Tuscany, and I lived there as a kid.
wow.
So
No
I used to
kidding.
get so annoyed. I went to a Catholic high school in London, Ontario, Canada, and it was inner city school, so it was all Italians, Portuguese, Polish, whatever. And every time there was like a Euro game or a World Cup game, all the Genos, we called them, they'd all show up with soccer jerseys on, and they're like, "Oh, I'm
Right.
Italian, bro." And I'm like, "Dude, your great grandfather came over, and your last name is whatever, Malanzano or something." I'm like, "I literally lived there last year." They're like, "You're not Italian," and I'm like,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
have Italian passport. Anyway, it doesn't matter.
Right, right. Yeah, and your
Um,
name's Hall, so they're
my name's
like, "Nah,
Hall.
get
Yeah,
out of here. You're not an Italian." Right.
exactly.
Right. And by the
Um,
way, because our moms are Italian but not our dads, we actually have 50+% DNA usually. So we're
okay.
probably more Italian than those guys.
I
But you would
mean,
never.
that's right. We're just We only have the best here on this show.
I
But
was going to swear in Italian right there, but I won't do it. This is it.
oh my goodness, I know.
There's an
Um,
Italian phrase for what the I won't say it right there.
um,
But by the way,
so
so you were just in Assisi.
yeah,
Now that when you walk into Francis's Basilica is unbelievable, and
yeah,
no one's ever been. There's like a crypt and a crypt and a
yeah.
crypt, and it's incredible. But when you walk into the Basilica of Clare, where Clare's body is, that the poor Clare's kept, that's where the San Damiano cross went first.
Hmm.
And so you walk into the front doors and you go off to the right and you walk into this little chapel and you're like, whoa,
Yeah.
there it is, right? I've got on my wall right there, actually. The San Damiano cross.
Hmm.
That's the actual original cross
Yep.
that when Francis was there in this dilapidated, fallen apart church, Jesus on that cross, the mouth starts to move and he speaks to him. He
Yep.
says, Francesco, repara la mia casa, right? Repair
Yep.
my house, for it has fallen. And at that moment, Francis is looking around thinking, yeah, this house, this church is falling apart. All right. So he starts picking up a brick and fixing it. And then later on, one could look at this back, looking back in retrospect, and Francis himself, as he becomes a reformer of the church, not a rebeller of
Hmm.
the church. He doesn't lead a rebellion which is what Luther led. Luther did not lead a reformation. I mean, it's Francis that truly reforms. He's called upon to repair la mia casa, my house, my church, chiesa, right, uppercase C, and to repair the church. But that's and you know it was after that Francis received the stigmata as
Hmm.
well. After that moment, not at that exact moment, but after that
Yep.
moment in front of the San Damiano cross.
Did you ever read Chesterton's biography of Francis?
Yeah, I did. I do I like it? I guess I do. I feel like at first he messes around for so long
That's
in
what
the opening.
Chesterton does, though. It's
He does, yeah. It
yeah.
drives me crazy. It's like, so let us try this experiment. So what
I
if we
know.
do? Shut up and tell the story, dude. Right? And then he gets to it and starts talking. But I shouldn't make fun of him. I love Chester.
Yeah.
But yeah. So he gets to a point, and then he does this with the Aquinas as
Yes.
well. The Damox, same thing. But yeah, I like it. I like a lot of it. Sure.
Well, I remember the moment when he gets to the stigmata in that book. It was pretty powerful. Like it was
Right.
Chesterton's work is like I can relate because I love to write like him. And then when I work with an editor, they're like, you need to get to the point. And I see all these
Right.
notes. And then 10 pages later, they're like, oh, I see why. And I was like, you got to give
Yeah.
it time.
Right.
Anyway, it's not it for everybody. But
No, but you're right. In Chesterton's day, you could get away with that kind of writing,
the
which
attention span was longer, honestly. People were
the
like,
attention
they
span was
read for
longer.
pleasure always.
Right. And also,
Yeah.
too, as an editor myself, we call that the author's voice.
Yes.
So you really don't want to cut all that out. I mean, if they did Jefferson's Declaration of Independence today, they'd probably cut the first paragraph, which
Yeah.
would be madness,
Yeah.
right? But yeah, an editor today would do that, unfortunately, and it would change the essence of Chesterton
Yeah.
for better or worse.
If Chesterton had Twitter, he would have been a internet celebrity
Oh,
with all his
oh,
one-liners.
so true. That's so true. He's the master of the one-liner,
He
right?
was.
Dale Alpwitz calls him the apostle of common sense. But yeah, he was truly the master of the pithy statement or
Yeah.
phrase, turn of phrase. I don't think anybody could ever do it as well as Chesterton, other than maybe I happen to have it right here, Fulton Sheen. He was
He
pretty
was
good
quite
at
good
it.
as well. Well, he was friends with Chesterton.
Yeah, that's right. He was. Yeah,
Chesterton wrote the foreword to his dissertation.
yeah. And when I found that out fairly recently, and I've been a fan of Sheen for a long time, I was fascinated by that. I thought that was quite amazing.
Well,
Two amazing.
but I haven't actually shown your book. I think I just showed it on the screen quick, but I want to make sure everybody knows where to get it. Just, ladies and gentlemen, you can find a link for it in the description area, whether you're watching or listening, whatever platform you're on, and the link is there. And there's a link that I've provided, and you get a discount if you use that link, so it's good for you. And we were talking about Fulton Sheen, and just real quickly, I do have to do a shameless plug for a men's conference that my Holy Name Society is putting on. It's the Canadian Martyrs Men's Conference, and but one of our keynote speakers is Mr. Al Smith, and he is a Fulton Sheen expert. He runs a Fulton Sheen apostolate, so he's going to be there with all his stuff. So if you're into Sheen and you're into going to men's conferences. Check the links out. Everyone wants to come to Canada in February because it's basically like the Caribbean, you know. So last year we had about 30% or so of our attendees were American, so we're hoping to up that number this year. Our dollar is so low that I think it's like 68 cents. So if you come over to Canada, it's like our, you know, you almost get twice as much value. So it's good for everybody. But check the links for that Canadian Martyrs Men's Conference. So one more question I wanted to ask you that I was thinking about earlier is so there's a process for making sure someone's a real stigmatist. There have been, I mean, they say there have been fakers or whatever, and I've seen weird, you know, TV shows back in the day about paranormal stuff, and, you know, it's the ghost chasing kind of things gets mixed into there. But how do we know someone's a real stigmatist? Are there like demonic kind of ones? Like, is there kind of been instances where it's something's happening, but it's not of God? Like, what's the process there?
Yeah, so I hear about that all the time, but I've never actually really counted an example that I could say, you know, this person was a well-known faker as a stigmatist. This person was demon possessed as a. So I've heard about this stuff, but I haven't seen it. I haven't actually
Okay.
seen any of it. And now it's the kind of thing that you cannot fake.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I mean, maybe somebody one time, right, could drill into their, which would be really hard to do. I mean,
Yeah.
that's most people are not capable of inflicting that type of sustained pain on themselves, right? But somebody like a Padre Pio, who had the markings for 50 years, bled a cup a day, everybody watched it. Teams of doctors, psychiatrists, Vatican skeptics. I mean, the Vatican, in the process of canonization, has what they call, I forget what the Latin word is, but a devil's advocate, whose job is to just come in and try to shoot holes in
Yeah.
whatever's going on. In so many of the cases, and you'll see chapter to chapter in this book, I quote extensively from medical reports, medical examinations. Therese Newman, Anne Catherine Emmerich, you'll have these, kind of really austere, exacting, rigid, tough German doctors,
Yeah.
skeptics, agnostics, who are dubious of all of this, and they'll write in their reports, I am personally not a believer, but I cannot deny what I'm seeing. This woman's hands start to bleed on Thursday. By Friday, we could hardly move her. She's bleeding. By Saturday morning, the wounds disappear and there's no trace. And I cannot explain this. Oh, and she hasn't eaten anything except for what these Catholics call the Eucharist, Holy Communion. All she eats is this daily. I'm here. I watch. She'll take water. We've tried to give her food. We have to force it to her. She vomits it up. She only lives on what she calls her daily bread. And she's been doing this, Therese Newman, for 40 years. And I can attest as her physician that she weighed 125 pounds on this date, 30 years ago, and she now weighs 210. She gains weight. This is something I cannot explain as a doctor. So all of these people, Padre Pio, I mean, they were put through the ringer by physicians, psychiatrists, by fellow clergy. Padre Pio said the worst suffering that he went through was by doubting clergy,
Hmm.
who didn't believe him. So they endure this all of the time, and it's something they just can't fake. In one case, one of the psychiatrists said of Padre Pio, so I see that he is indeed bleeding from his hand. It's undeniable, undeniable, no question this is happening here. I figured out why. I diagnose autosuggestion.
Yeah.
The friar is causing this by autosuggestion. I mean, can you imagine this, Kennedy? Let me think. My hands are bleeding, right? You can get the side here. Feet, right? 50 years, nonstop, every day, cup of blood a day, crawling on his arms to get to his cell, has to walk backwards down the altar when he's given communion because he can't step on the heels of his feet. Oh, and Pio said, I'll tell you what, tell him to imagine that he's a bull, and let's see if he grows horns in his head, right? But completely crazy. I mean, that takes a greater leap of faith. Another Gemelli, who was, I'll tell you, this guy was awful, Vatican official. When people read the chapter on Padre Pio, they're going to be really upset with the way he was treated by some of the people in the church. And this guy was just another kind of crackpot psychologist said, I have also diagnosed with PO. Him and his superior, Father Benedetto, are in an incubus succubus relationship, right? And all this kind of like Freudian mumbo jumbo, just bizarre stuff. But he really went through a lot, and they all do.
Yeah.
So they're all put through the ringer. So if anybody is ever faking it, I don't know who that would be, for a sustained period of time, I mean, they're caught.
Well,
I
they would get
mean,
sick. That's the thing too. Like, you can't have open wounds for that long.
right?
You
You
just,
can't.
it's just not
And they never get
possible.
infected. In all the cases, in fact, one of the things the doctors all marvel about is like the wounds never get infected.
Yeah.
And they would often, this was like almost a form of torture to Anne Catherine Emmerich. They did to Pio too. They would try to treat it. They would put an ointment on it. They would put some kind of treatment on it. Would make it even worse. If they would bandage it up in a way to not allow them to like freely bleed, that would be difficult. And oh, Gemelli, what he did to Pio, he suggested putting Pio's legs in a cast in order to so he couldn't tamper. So Padre Pio couldn't tamper with the wounds in his feet, right? I mean, this poor guy would have been in agony had they done something like that. But most reasonable people from the Vatican or wherever else would come in and say, I'm watching it. The guy's bleeding from his hands. He's not causing it. Everybody's witnessed it. This is real. And some of the agnostics would say, I'm not a Christian, but this is of the supernatural. This is not something that can be explained by physical phenomena within this world.
When I was in Italy, I can't remember where we were. We went to like a ton of places. It was 10 days. It was action packed, somewhere new every 2 days. And there's so many relics. And, like we're at one place where one of them was in Florence, and San Miniato, he was Saint Miniato or whatever. There's a chapel at the top of the hill overlooking the city, and 300s or something, he was a martyr, and he walked up, he got his head cut off, and he walked up holding his head and went to where the small chapel where he used to pray, and everyone attested to it. All the pagans saw it. It was just a thing. He was this famous soldier, gets his head cut off and carries his head, goes up and prays to die after he walked up. And the stairs are hard to walk up for like an in shape, military age male, and he's doing it with no head. And I just remember looking at my wife at one point, and I said, atheism is so stupid. Like, all these things, the relics, the miracles, things like this. And I thought, oh my goodness gracious, like, I can't believe there are atheists anymore. It's just crazy to me.
Well, and I think with stigmatists, this is a sign from the heavens to us in our skeptical age that you didn't live through the first century, you didn't see the apostles and everything, and much like Marian apparitions, right? Here's something for you in your modern age that you can see. I mean, short of Jesus coming out and walking around or appearing in the sky, right? I mean, these are living crucifixes, as they call them. Here are people that are bleeding from their hands and feet, and genuinely, really holy, devout people who usually become saints. All right.
Yeah.
And you know enough. You have enough medical science, everything else, and frankly, common sense that you ought to be able to look at this and believe it. Now, I think if you want an example of the devil in action today, why aren't CNN and Fox News and MSNBC and the New York Times and the Toronto Sun and everybody else, why aren't they out there with their cameras outside of the homes of these people in our time, in our day, over the last 50, 60 years? One of my stigmatists, Elena Aiello, died in 1961. Therese Newman, 1965. Padre Pio, 1968. Why aren't they there with their cameras? Actually, they were for Padre Pio, but they should be out there showing the whole world. And the fact that they don't shows, one, just how secular our age is, that they don't even care about it. If they do hear about it, maybe they make fun of it, or worse, they just completely ignore it. And it might even be a sign of the devil at work that they're not out there with their cameras, and instead they're just talking about the election. They're just talking about whatever. But people ought to be focused on this.
I mean, listen, two things we got to talk about more: stigmatists and the AFC and the potential Super Bowl matchups.
You got it.
Paul, thank you so much for coming on. Ladies and gentlemen, I'll show the link one more time here just to make sure you know what you're getting yourself into. It's the stigmatists, their gifts, their revelations, their warnings. We didn't even talk about that. We got to leave that so you can go find out for yourself. Also, there is an audiobook. You can get the MP3 audio download from Tan, and I would imagine it's Audible and Everend and all those places where audiobooks are sold. And remember the link. You use the link that's in my thing. You will get a discount, so everyone's happy there. And we have a post. I was telling you we have a postal strike in Canada. And so I have all these books I'm waiting for. And this one hasn't arrived yet because it's probably stuck in some warehouse. So I can't wait to actually have the physical copy because I can't wait to read it. And before we go anywhere, people should check out your work. I know it's at Crisis, but other places, other works as well.
Yeah, thanks. So I'm the editor in chief of the American Spectator,
Oh,
and
I didn't
so
know that.
our website, yeah, our website, you should write for us.
Oh,
Our
okay.
website is spectator.org, and you can follow all my writings there. So check me out there. You can look up my other books at Amazon.com. I've written over 20 books, a lot on Reagan, the communism. Did a book called The Devil and Karl Marx, which a lot of people have written. I think you even wrote about that, actually. I think you quoted in one of your articles. But anyway, those are places where you could find my work. Yeah.
Oh, good. Well, excellent. So, ladies and gentlemen, check that out. And if you're seeing this on YouTube, it was already for people on my Substack, just for viewers. If you like to see things sooner, there's a link for that in the description as well. All right, ladies and gentlemen, God bless you all. And as always, this has been Mere Tradition. And until next time, continue having a great Advent, and I will see you soon. Thanks, Paul.
Grazie, fratello. Ciao.
Ciao.